Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about how to build an Aeldari Wraith Host army in Pariah Nexus. So I have covered this before on the channel, but I thought it would be really cool to cover it again, seeing as we've seen some considerable points drops on a couple of different Wraith units over the last few points changes and balanced data slates, and you can actually afford a lot more Wraiths than you were able to in the past. So having said that, are Wraith Host armies going to be a lot stronger now that they've seen considerable points decreases? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. Now, for those of you out there who love Wraith armies, who love the Wraith Guard and the Wraith Lords, and of course the Wraith Blades and Wraith Knights and stuff like that, you're going to be in luck because you can afford a lot more of them in your armies than you were previously. However, I will just put a caveat on this. They are still very expensive, and if you do go all in on the rates, they are going to be a small army. You're going to be basically having probably about as many models as Custodes player may have, or, a Dark Angels player perhaps. Somebody using a lot of Terminators or Terminator equivalents in their force. So you're not going to have a lot of models, and that can be really tricky for newer players to play with. I know that Wraiths on just on the outside, they look like an easy unit to use. They look very beginner friendly. A lot of people say, well, if you're going to start Eldar and you're not used to how squishy the Eldar are, you might want to start with Wraiths. And while they are, easier to have survive and stuff like that, it is harder to win a game with a Wraith-based army unless you really know what you're doing. So in this video, we're not only going to go over how to build one and the different kind of list builds you can run with your rates, but we're also going to look into the strategies behind the army and how to play them effectively. So, first, let's take a look at what we're going to be talking about in today's video. We are going to be looking at the relevant data sheets for the Wraith units we will be using and their support options, because you do need support options for your Wraith Blades, Wraith Guard, and Wraith Lords. We're going to be talking about the strengths and weaknesses of a Wraith host in Pariah Nexus, how to play and position a Wraith host on the battlefield, and lastly, a few example lists of possible Wraith host builds that you can use in your games. So, starting off with Wraith Guard. Now, these are my personal favorite. I love the Wraith Guard. I think they've always been really cool. When, Wraith Guard weren't good back in 5th edition, I used to run a, kind of fun 2,000 point list with Wraith Guard, nothing but Wraith Guard and Wraith Lords, and it was super fun. So I really like these guys a lot. Now looking at their stat line, movement 6, toughness 7, a 2+ save, 3 wounds, leadership 6, of course, an OC 1. These guys have a better stat line than Terminators. They have the same save, they still have that 3 wounds, but better toughness and better movement. However, when you start to look at their ranged weapons and melee weapons, they do fall off, and that is the trade-off between Wraith Guard and Terminators. Now, as for their ranged weapons, they do either get to choose from the Wraith Cannon with devastating wounds, range 18, 1 attack apiece, ballistic skill 4+, strength 14, AP -4, and damage d6. Very powerful weapon, don't get me wrong, but Terminators do get that really powerful close combat weapon, either a power fist or a thunder hammer or something like that, and the Wraith Guard really don't. They're stuck with just regular close combat with 3 attacks, strength 5, AP 0, damage 1 at weapon skill 4+. You don't want to go with the Wraith Cannon, you can pick the D-Scythe, which is range 12, D6 attacks, ballistic skill 4+, strength 10, AP -4, and damage 1. This weapon is more of an anti-infantry weapon, but it can punch up into vehicles, especially if you have a Spirit Seer in the unit to help you. Normally, though, you are going to go with the Wraith Cannon because the D-Scythe just has a really short range and it's really hard to get to the targets you want to get to with your Wraith Guard. Now, as for their ability, it has been nerfed several times over the edition, but it's still pretty powerful. Once per battle round, when an enemy unit targets this unit, after that unit has finished making its attacks, you can shoot at that unit, which is pretty good. As long as it's an eligible target, right? So indirect fire shooting at you, you won't be able to target it because you won't have line of sight. If it's something that has lone op, you're not going to be able to shoot it because, again, it has to be an eligible target if you're outside of 12 inches. But it's really helpful for things that, like to get reasonably close to you when you're on an objective or try to take an objective away from you, shoot you with plasma guns or whatever it is. You can then shoot back at your, opponent. Really powerful control ability and something that people still use in competitive play to leverage one side of the battlefield to their advantage. The next unit, of course, is Wraith Blades. They're the combat version of the Wraith Guard. Same stat line, but they have better weapons in combat. So they have the Ghost Axe or Ghost Swords. The Ghost Axe is a 3 attack, weapon skill 4+, strength 7, AP -2, damage 2 weapon, good at killing Marines. Ghost Swords are 5 attacks, still hitting on a 4+, strength 6, AP -2, and damage 1. They're better at killing guard equivalent targets, or, generally just stuff with 1 wound. Ghost Axes are better against things with multiple wounds, for the most part. Now, as for their ability, they have the Malevolent Souls ability, which gives them Fight Undeath on a 4+, which is pretty powerful, especially if you take these in larger units, or, just a smaller unit that is going to be stuck in a slog all game with the support of a Spirit Seer. And lastly, of course, if you do take the Ghost Axe, you do also get the Force Shield, which gives you a 4+ invul save. Now, against most targets, that 4+ invul is not going to really help you against most shooting attacks. It's really only going to help you against AP -3 or better in combat. So against power fists and things like that, actually the Ghost Swords will probably give you more leverage against certain targets, especially Deathwing Knights. Anything with -1 damage, you're always going to be better off with the Ghost Swords against those targets than the Ghost Axes. But those are specific examples, and usually you're going to want that 4+ invul save for things that can punch you at range. Alright, so let's talk about the Wraith Knight. Now, the Wraith Knight is one of the most imposing models in the entire game. Super big, can take a bunch of different weapons. As for its stat line, movement 10, which is pretty, it's fair. It's not the best movement in the game, but it's not slow by any means. Toughness 12, 2+ save. 18 wounds, which is a little bit on the lower side compared to things like Apparel Knights, but it has an ability that kind of makes up for that. It has leadership 6+ and 10 OC, which is fantastic. 10 OC is great for controlling objectives. As for its ranged weapons, it can take the heavy Wraith Cannon, which has blast and devastating wounds with 36-inch range, D3 attacks, ballistic skill 3+, because of course it is piloted by 2 Spirit Seers, I believe, or a Spirit Seer and the dead spirit of something else, some other type of warrior. Strength 20, which is pretty insane for a weapon. I think it's the strongest strength we have in our index. AP -4, of course, and damage 2d6. As for its secondary weapon options, it can take either 2 scatter lasers, 2 shuriken cannons, or 2 star cannons. You're probably always going to go with the star cannon just because of the nature of this thing and what it's good at taking out. And then you have the sun cannon, which is an option you can use to replace a heavy Wraith Cannon, 48-inch range, 2d6 attacks, 3+, of course, to hit, strength 8, AP -3 and damage 3. Really good at taking out Terminators. The 2d6 attacks is pretty variable, but in my experience, you're averaging about 7. Has blast, or excuse me, doesn't have blast though, like last edition, which, last edition it was a little better. But, this edition, you're still getting 2d6 attacks, and you're probably going to pick up a few Terminators with that. As for the melee weapons, you can give it a Titanic Ghostglaive, which is awesome. Now, this thing really hits hard. Either the strike profile, which has 5 attacks, hitting on a 3+, strength 16, AP -3, and damage 6. So, think Fire Prism with 1 less AP, and that's pretty much what this thing is, just with more attacks. And then the Ghost Glaive Sweep gives you 15 attacks, hitting on a 3+, strength 8, AP -2, damage 2. Which, surprisingly, is better than the Avatar of Cain Sweep, which is only done at strength 7. So this guy's really good at also killing Space Marines, especially with something like Guide on. Now, as for how you're going to arm this thing, I think there's probably two different ways. You can either do dual heavy Wraith Cannons, or you could do a Wraith Cannon and a Ghost Glaive. I think the Sun Cannon Wraith Cannon is an option as well. If you're going against an enemy that has a lot of 3-wound models, like if your local meta is just filled with, decently armored 3-wound infantry, I think the Sun Cannon is the way to go. That's just me. If you're more of an all-comer or you're going into a lot of different factions, I think either the dual heavy Wraith Cannons or the Wraith Cannon and Ghost Glaive is the way you want to go with this thing. As for its abilities, it has two. One of them is just something that pretty much every Titanic model gets. Each time it makes a normal, advance, or fallback move, it can move over other models. And terrain features that are 4 inches or less in height, as if they were not there, which is great, but it's not as good as the thing that Imperial Knights have now, where they can move through terrain and stuff like that. Just have to take a battle shock test to make sure they're not battle shocked. Really powerful ability that they got, and this does not apply to the Wraith Knight. It also has a Wraithbone form, which is a -1 damage ability. So basically, each time an attack is allocated to it, you subtract 1 from the attack's damage characteristic. This helps it survive much better against damage to weapons usually. So like, things like heavy bolters and stuff like that, this thing almost takes no damage from. But against the, more powerful weapons, it might save it a couple wounds here and there, but it's not going to be anything spectacular. Now, it can also take a Scatter Shield, which gives it a 4+ invul save, but unless you're just running it for fun, and, you're just maybe running it against a friend in a friendly 1,000-point game just to see, just to have some fun, spend an afternoon playing, I just don't think it's good. It's probably one of the worst options, because you do have to take away either a heavy Wraith Cannon or, a Titanic Ghost Glaive to be able to use it. So it's not the greatest warrior option. And then, of course, we come to the Wraith Lord. Now, the Wraith Lord we'll talk about, and then we're going to talk about the Wraith Seer. I don't have its data sheet up here, but we are going to talk about it, and I'll kind of talk about why I didn't choose to include it. But the Wraith Lord is movement 8, so kind of on the slower side, kind of pretty much the same speed as a Dreadnought, something like that. Toughness 11, 2+ save, 10 wounds, leadership 6, and OC 3. It's actually a lot tougher than a lot of Dreadnoughts, though, which is a good thing. As far as its weapon options, it can take up to 2 Aeldari heavy weapons, so missile launchers, bright lances, scatter lasers, shuriken cannons, star cannons. But you're probably always going to want to take either the bright lances or the shuriken cannons, because the shuriken cannons help it make up for its accuracy, having ballistic skill 4 by having sustained hits 1. And the bright lancers are just good because, we have a reroll to hit, reroll to wound because of our detachment bonus, our battle host bonus, and we have fate dice. So that's the reason why you want to take the bright lances over usually any other weapon. As far as its melee weapons, you do want to give it the Ghost Glaive. It is going to be something that is free and that you can always take, at least in 10th edition. You can take the strike or the sweep every time you attack. The strike is really good against, heavier targets, vehicles, stuff like that. But anything over toughness 10 is going to be a little bit of a stretch to take out. And then up close, it also has the sweep, which has 8 attacks, hitting on a 4+, strength 7, AP -2, and damage 2. I think the big thing about the Wraith Lord is that it is relatively cheap for what you get. It's 145 points. It has the Fated Hero ability, so each time it destroys something, you gain a Fate dice into your Fate pool, which is okay. It's not the best ability out there, but it's pretty decent. And it's a dual threat. It can be a good range tool, Overwatch tool, by being able to not only use Flamers in Overwatch, but a Bright Lance you can auto-hit with a Fate dice, especially if you have a Farseer nearby. And also being able to just mix it up in combat when you needed to get on an objective, support an enemy unit, support a friendly unit that's trying to take an enemy unit off an objective. It's good at that kind of stuff, but it's not going to solo a single side of the battlefield for you unless you're playing at really low points. This thing is really good at taking out small units of things if it has to, You know, Flamers, 2 Bright Lances, and of course charging in afterward with the Ghostglaive can take out most 5-man units of Marines. It can deal some significant damage as well if it rolls a little bit luckier to smaller units of things like maybe Sanguinary Guard, stuff like that. Again, probably have to roll lucky on that 4+ to hit. I think it's actually a 5+ if those guys are joined by a character, which, you know, in that certain situation, you're probably going to want to shoot them first and then, of course, charge in after. But yeah, I think it can mix it up with a lot of different units. Not the most OP thing out there, but Wraith Lords are pretty good, and they do have OC3, so they can, you know, kind of contest objectives from other, you know, lighter vehicles and things like rhinos and stuff like that as well. Now, I also said I would talk about the Wraith Seer. A lot of you are probably disappointed it's not on here. But I have to say, the reason why it's not on here is because the Wraith Seer is not only worse than the Wraith Lord now in pretty much every way, because it's just not costed as it should, but GW kind of giving up on it as far as its points decreases and points buffs also signals that obviously it's not going to be here when the Codex comes. So I think the Wraith Seer can be just proxied as a Wraith Lord in most cases, and that's fine. I honestly don't think the Wraith Seer has much of a use outside of maybe dealing with hordes of tough infantry. I think it's okay against orcs, you know, with its anti-infantry 2+ sweep attacks, but it's still hitting on a 4+. I just don't think it's that great of a model overall. It sacrifices one heavy weapon for the destructor power, which is essentially a heavy flamer, so it's kind of a downgrade in a lot of ways. It doesn't get the 2 flamers on the side, so it doesn't get the 2 Aeldari flamers that the Wraith Lord can get. And yes, you always want to give the Wraith Lord the Aeldari flamers. They're better in every single way to the shuriken catapults. I think the only, you know, upside to the shuriken catapults is they have an 18-inch range, but they're hitting on 4+. You're probably not going to do any damage with them. Aeldari flamers also have the assault keyword, so you're still going to be able to advance with this thing and flame something if you need to. And sometimes you will have to, because, you know, if an opponent is using infiltrators and stuff like that, on the first turn of the game, you might not necessarily have anything that your Bright Lances can shoot at. So, you know, you advance up the board, shoot some flamers at maybe, you know, a unit of mandrakes, or, you know, an enemy unit of rangers or something like that. And you could possibly kill them with those. But yeah, I just think, going back to the Wraith Seer, I just think it's not as good as the Wraith Lord in any way. It's more expensive than the Wraith Lord, and really the only reason you would want to bring it is because it looks cool. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about it. I used to think it'd be okay against characters and stuff, but as the game has evolved, and as I've played tested the Wraith Seer in a couple of matchups, I always felt like I'd rather have a Wraith Lord. You know, I always felt like I was basically just missing one heavy weapon from a Wraith Lord, and you know, its melee weapon also isn't as good in a lot of circumstances, so I just really didn't like it too much this edition. So it's unfortunate, but you know, that's just how it is. Alright, as for some of the support units, we have the Spirits here. So the Spirits here gives a unit of Wraith Guard, Wraith Blades, or Wraith Lord, can actually join a Wraith Lord as well, which is kind of weird. The Spirit Mark, which gives it lethal hits, and adds +1 to the hit roll of that model. It can also return one destroyed bodyguard model to that unit, but of course that means that it has to be Wraith Guard or Wraith Blades. Very powerful support character, only 65 points, very fragile, but also extremely good to have in your unit. Now, one thing you have to note though, is that it is a Psyker, and it will make your unit vulnerable to anti-Psyker effects. So yeah, the really, excuse me, really the one weakness of the Spirit Seer is that it is a Psyker, obviously. But, weirdly enough, doesn't have any kind of psychic weapon. So, you know, it does have the Witch Staff, but it doesn't have a ranged psychic attack. And I guess that's because the Tears of Isha ability is what the psychic attack should be. So, if you're using your Wraith Guard or Wraith Blades, you're probably going to want to attach a Spirit Seer to it, regardless of whether they're in a 5-man or in a 10-man brick. We also have the Farseer. Now, I won't go too much into this because we pretty much know what the Farseer does, but pretty good shooting attack with Eldritch Storm, branching fates to, boost fate dice to a 6, really useful on things like the Wraith Knight and Wraith Lords. You definitely want to foot Farseer in a Wraith list no matter what. And Fortune, which makes them a lot tougher. Subtracting 1 from the wound roll is amazing, especially on the Wraith Knight, who has toughness 12. So even last cannons are going to be wounding the Wraith Knight on 5+, going to make it much tougher to kill. And, things like fusion guns and stuff like that, really high AP weapons are going to be wounding on 6s, which is pretty insane. So yeah, the Farseer is definitely a pick that you want in a Wraith army. You also might want to think about the Farseer SkyRunner because, also has branching fates, but also has guide. So your Wraith Knight or, Wraith Guard unit of 10 can be re-rolling their hit rolls and fishing for lethal hits. So one thing I like to do is if I'm running a unit of maybe, Wraith Blades with Ghost Swords, using guide on that unit, and then I can fish for 6s. I can fish for those lethals against harder targets, and I can do a lot more damage. Farseer SkyRunner is a pretty good model for a Wraith list. I would say optional for the most part, but can boost the damage considerably of your models. Guardian Defenders are another support unit you definitely want in a Wraith list, and the reason being is they generate more fate dice for you. Wraith units love fate dice either for their damage or their saves. They really enjoy it, and they also enjoy it for their advance rolls. They're a slower army, so you definitely want to make the most out of your advance rolls. So you don't want to roll 1s and 2s, but, 4s, 5s, and 6s generally get you to where you want to go. The Autarch or Autarch Wayleaper, obviously, also a great pick because it gives you command points. I like the Autarch on foot the best in this type of list just because you get even more CP generation kind of with its new ability that it can reduce the CP cost of a unit or a stratagem used by the unit it joins by 1. So your Guardian Defenders can use Phantasm for free. Your Guardian Defenders can use Overwatch for free. That's really powerful, especially with that Brightlands platform. But if you want to go the Wayleaper route, the Wayleaper is just another character for your army. Another thing to do actions with, another unit to screen with, and a very powerful combatant in its own right. It has the Howling Banshee Mask, which has fights first, so you can use this guy to support your Wraith units and stuff like that against enemy units that are probably going to maybe beat them in combat. We also have the Corsair Void Reavers. Now, I did want to talk about this unit as well because, especially in kind of a more mechanized Wraith list, you might want 1 or 2 of these units in the list to be able to move up the battlefield stage a little bit and provide a, more safe area for your Wraith Guard to advance up into, because they can pull a lot of double duty. The Wave Serpent is a good move blocker and, engager in a lot of ways. And of course, the Void Reavers are good at staging for objectives, staging behind ruins and stuff like that, just waiting for enemies to come in, or move blocking, or kind of whatever you want them to do or need them to do. They're also pretty decent at secondary objectives for a low cost. And, of course, we have the Wave Serpent, which pairs great with the Corsair Void Reavers because they give it Scout. So if they're inside of it, they benefit from, or the Wave Serpent, I should say, benefits from the Scout rule. Now, looking at this thing, it can take, a twin-linked Eldar heavy weapon, which is alright. Twin-linked Bright Lance is probably what you're going to take. Twin-linked Shuriken Cannon's not a bad option either. The Wave Serpent Shield does D3 mortals and a battle shock test once per battle. It is in your shooting phase. You do have to select an enemy unit that's visible and within 12. But this thing's also pretty durable, in a Wraith list as well, which prides itself on being durable. You have, the most durable Eldar transport in it, with a 5+ invul save, 13 wounds. Only OC2. It doesn't have as much damage as the Falcon, but it is still something that's going to be helpful. And I'll just say this right now, being able to move block an enemy unit from being able to, charge into your Wraith Brick can mean the difference in a Wraith host between victory and defeat. Especially, 6-man bricks of, World Eater units or anything like that. If you're able to use a Wave Serpent to wedge between them with their insane movement and stuff like that to prevent a charge on Wraith Brick, Wraith Guard in a squad of 10, then that can definitely mean the difference between winning and losing a battle. Okay, so let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of a Wraith Host in Pariah Nexus. So, number one, its strengths, extremely durable, deals really punishing damage as well. Got Wraith Cannons, Ghost Swords, heavy Wraith Cannons. I have to laugh a little bit there because there's just so many things with Wraith Cannon, But they're really powerful, obviously. You got Wraith Lords, which are strong as well with their, Ghost Glaives. So, really good damage, really durable. Also, great primary objective and board control. You have Wraith Guard, who have good board control with their ability. You have great primary objective control because they're so tough, they're hard to take off of objectives with shooting alone. And those are the main strengths of a Wraith Host army. However, let's talk about their weaknesses. They are slower than most Eldar builds. They're still faster than some armies out there, especially with that movement 6 and the ability to, use Fate Dice to make 6-inch advances and stuff like that. We also have a stratagem that allows them to make a 6-inch advance. We have Fire and Fade. We have Phantasm. So we are still faster than some armies, but we're not as fast as traditional Eldar builds. They are also super weak to mortal wound spam and anti-large or anti-terminator equivalent damage type abilities or units. So things with anti-infantry against Wraith Guard specifically, things with anti-monster or anti-psyker, they're extremely weak to, and of course mortal wound spam from armies like Thousand Suns or Grey Knights, they're going to be vulnerable to as well. They're also not great at the secondary objective game, and the scoring on those secondary objectives can be more difficult, especially because you don't have the really fast units usually that, typical Eldar builds will have. You're just not going to have the points for them. So you might not have points for double Warp Spider. You might not have points for, triple Swooping Hawk, stuff like that. Because you're going to need other things in the army to support it in the way that you're going to want to play. So secondary objectives can be a little harder. Alright, so how do you play and position a Wraith Host on the battlefield? So number one, don't spread your forces out too thinly. Make sure that you concentrate on one side of the battlefield so that your units can support each other. Identify the biggest threats and either screen or take them out accordingly. So basically, the big thing here is, at least for me, when you see big melee threats that can just wipe out your Wraith Knight in one turn, wipe out your Wraith Brick in one turn, you definitely want to figure out a way to take those out or screen them with units. So units like Rangers, Corsair Void Reavers, which I talked about, of course, stuff like that, you want to be able to use to, kind of put a buffer between those units. Wave Serpents are also good at this, or you just want to simply take those units out, right? You want to leverage it so that you can get line of sight to those units early on and kill them. And of course, using infiltrators and scouts again to prevent your opponent from move blocking you is also important, because you want to be able to get your Wraith Guard, Wraith Lords, Wraith Knight into a position where they can affect the battlefield from turn 2 onward. If they can't get to the objectives that they need to get to by turn 2, then you're probably going to lose the game because you're going to be stuck. The problem with Wraith armies, they don't have fly, you don't have anything that can move over enemy units, so it's really difficult to actually maneuver them into a position where they can be able to, capture primary objectives. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what positioning them might look like on the battlefield. So we're going to use Train Layout 2. Just out of convenience, this is the one me and my buddies play on all the time because it's pre-set up at the shop, and it's a lot of, it's a lot of our favorite train layout for Pariah Nexus. So we have it set up like this. We are going to use Tipping Point. So it was suggested to me in a previous video in the comments that, maybe I should use some different deployment types because, Dawn of War is maybe not the most prevalent in competitive play in tournaments and stuff. So decided to use Tipping Point as an example. And let's go ahead and look at a typical deployment for a Wraith build. So I'm going to go and explain what all these are, but basically infiltrating here, we have 2 units of Rangers. We have a unit of Rangers up here and over here. And basically these are here to just screen out from 9 inches away any enemy units that might want to be move blocking our Wraith Brick. Now the reason why this Ranger is over here is because we want to make sure that our opponent sends something over here to deal with them. And if our opponent doesn't, if our opponent just decides to full out just try to stop us over here, they're going to run into some issues because we're going to just get this objective for free, right? So these guys are kind of over here. These guys are also over here to just prevent us from getting, outflanked super hard in the first turn. Units moving up, for example, if you have an army like World Eaters who are doing very well right now, being able to, scout up and then move up right here, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, right? So we put this unit here to prevent scout moves also. Okay, so there are our Rangers. Then we have 2 Wraith Lords and a Wave Serpent right here. The Wave Serpent will have something like Wraith Blades in it, maybe Wraith Guard in it in a unit of 5. We have a big unit of 10 Wraith Guard right here. We have a unit of Guardians with, of course, the Autarch inside. We have a Farseer back here, just solo, or it could be an Autarch Wayleaper, and the Farseers maybe in the squad of Guardians, whatever you want to go with. We have the Wraith Knight, and we have a Farseer SkyRunner. Again, if you didn't want the SkyRunner, you could replace it with a squad of Swooping Hawks, for example, for some extra objective power. Okay, so basically, turn 1, and whenever you do get the first turn, it doesn't really matter. Your goal is you're going to try to capture these 3 objectives on Tipping Point, and on other deployment zones as well. You definitely want to focus on being able to capture 3 objectives on one side of the battlefield and just control them. You want to make sure that you have line of sight down here with your big heavy hitters so that whatever comes in and tries to, contest your objective here, you can just quickly deal with. You want to obviously be in control of this objective and be able to shoot out here, which means you want to move your Wraith Brick of 10 on this objective here. And also, just in general, you're going to get less resistance from your opponent because they're probably not going to deploy as many units over here out in the open. They're probably going to deploy a lot of their units either right here behind this ruin here or behind this L-shaped ruin for protection. So what you're looking at here is being able to use your Wraith Brick to move up 6, advance 6, of course, so advance 12, right? And then fire and fade 6 onto this objective in one turn. So that should give you 18 inches to be able to move onto this objective and control it. This Ranger unit, depending on where your enemy units are, can be used then to move up and screen. And if you're wondering, well, Proxy Hammer, what if your opponent gets first turn and takes this objective first? Well, honestly, your Wraith Bricks right here, they could probably kill it, right? Like if your opponent charges out and kills these guys even, and is like sitting on the objective with one model and has like the rest of his models either here or here on the other side, you could just move your Wraith Brick up and just shoot it to death, right? Move 6 inches over here, advance. Yeah, maybe you wouldn't be able to advance and shoot him, but you could just move over normally, shoot him, fire and fade, and then maybe try to phantasm on the objective if you needed to. I think mostly you want to be able to get first turn, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. The Wraith Knight could also do it, could just move over 10 inches to here, shoot him, double Wraith Cannon. So there's a lot of options you have. But anyway, Wraith Guard should be able to control this objective here. The Guardians can stay on here, farm Fate Dice back here for you, and the 2 Wraith Lords and the Wave Serpent can try to contest this objective right here in the middle. Okay, so this is kind of what you want, though. You want basically to be able to control these 3 objectives, force your opponent through the middle here, so that you can then use your Wraith Brick to, shoot at whatever's coming through the middle. And if they try to go around you, you still have a really powerful unit right here that's going to be able to survive. You can also move this SkyRunner up here, right behind this little piece of terrain, so we can be constantly throwing Guide onto the Wraith Brick. And I'm telling you guys, Guide is so strong on the Wraith Brick. You get an Overwatch with rerolls. You get to reroll all of your attacks when you make attacks back at the enemy unit that attacks you. And of course, you get to reroll your hits normally. And that may seem like it has anti-synergy because of the lethal hits, but against some targets it really doesn't matter. Like against targets without invul saves, it's just not going to matter. And you don't have to reroll everything, you just reroll the misses, right? You're not like fishing for lethals, but you also just reroll your normal hits. And then of course you don't even have to do that if you don't want to. You could just throw it on the Wraith Knight, and the Wraith Knight is hitting on 3s normally, but sometimes you do whiff, so having rerolls on that Wraith Knight could help a lot as well. Okay, so let's go over some examples of some different lists that you could build at 2,000 points with a Wraith Host army. So starting out, we have the Wraith Brick build. So this is going to be based around a giant Wraith Brick, like you saw in the previous slide. We have the Autarch Wayleaper with Dragon Fusion Gun, Banshee Mask, and Starglaive at 115 points. We have the Farseer with Singing Spear at 80 points. Farseer SkyRunner with Singing Spear at 90 points. We have a Spirit Seer, Guardian Defenders of the Bright Lance, 10 Wraith Guard with Wraith Cannons, 5 Wraith Blades with Force Shields and Ghost Axes at 160. We have a Wraith Knight with 2 Heavy Wraith Cannons and 2 Star Cannons. We have 2 Wraith Lords with Bright Lances, Eldari Flamers, and Ghost Glaives, 2 squads of 10 or 5 Rangers, and we have a Wave Serpent with a Twin Bright Lance and Shuriken Cannon. So the idea behind this list, again, just like in the previous slide, the Wraith Lords are going to, and it just depends how your opponent deploys, but they're usually going to be in a support role where they can just kind of step out onto an objective, try to control it, be in a position where they're supported by the Wraith Brick as well on the next nearest objective. And then, of course, you also have the Wraith Blades who can stand on an objective pretty, reasonably easily and take some fire as well. Or act as a counter-attacking unit. They can take out a unit on an objective, and then the Wave Serpent can then move block, preventing other enemy units from being able to actually retake it. This list also works very well with just being able to keep a lot of your stuff alive. And I think really one of the only weaknesses of this list, again, would be something like a mortal wound spamming army. Like Thousand Suns would be really strong against this list because it could just kind of take out Wraith Lords without worrying about you screening too much. You don't have a ton of screening, so I could see a Thousand Suns list, piloted by a decent Thousand Suns player being able to dismantle this pretty quickly, so you do have to watch out for that. I could also see Grey Knights doing very well against this list because they can just, up and down every turn and just, spam their Librarian Mortal Wound. You know what it is, the Mortal Wound Bomb thing from the Librarians. They could just decimate whatever they touch with it, so I could definitely see that being a problem. But I think for the most part, this list works against a vast majority of the armies out there if you're able to screen effectively. And I guess the only real weakness is, other than the armies I previously mentioned, would be the secondary objectives, which we really only have 2 units that can deal with secondary objectives very well, and that's the Rangers. And the rest of the units are not going to be able to do that. So you might want to consider looking at your opponent's army before you decide and maybe going fixed. Or alternatively, going with tactical objectives, but being very conservative with it, and just trying to make sure that you maximize the objectives you can score by discarding every turn. So, a good way to get around having an army that doesn't work well on a lot of the secondary objectives is when you draw your 2 cards, spend a command point, because, you have the Autarch, right? I know it sucks to spend command points, but immediately spend that command point, discard it, pick up another card, right? And just cycle through your deck like that until you get all the secondaries that you can score throughout the game. And you pretty much know which ones you can score, right? Things like sabotage, things like containment, those kind of things that you can use to, score at least some secondary victory points throughout the game. You want to be able to do that as much as possible. So even if it does cost you an extra CP here and there throughout the game to discard and redraw. Okay, so the other type of Wraith list is the mechanized Wraith Host. So in this list, we're not going to have the Wraith Brick, but instead multiple small units of Wraith Guard and Blades. We do still have the Autarch Wayleaper, same build, Far Serpent Singing Spear, of course, 3 Spirit Seers this time, so, versus 2 that we had in the previous list. We have Guardian Defenders as well, because they're just a really good unit to have in a Wraith Blade or Wraith Host army. We have 5 Wraith Blades with Force Shields and Ghost Axes, and 2 squads of Wraith Guard with Wraith Cannons, divided up from the previous 10-man Wraith Brick. We still have the Wraith Knight. We have 3 units of 5 Rangers this time, so we have more Rangers for more secondary objectives, more screening. And then we have 3 Wave Serpents, all with the Wraith Guard and Wraith Blades inside of them. So this list is going to, weirdly enough, operate in very much the same way. We want to be able to control objectives, so we're going to be using the Wraith Blades with Force Shields and Ghost Axes to hold an objective, and we're going to use the Wraith Guard to come out later on and be able to shoot those units off those set objectives and then move into position. We're then going to use the Wave Serpents to move block and incapacitate enemy units that try to move in afterward. The extra squad of Rangers is going to be extra objective power. We don't have a Farseer SkyRunner in this list, just not really needed as much because we don't have that Wraith Brick, so the Rangers are kind of acting as another secondary objective score in that case. Now, I haven't tried this list yet out myself. I've tried the previous Wraith Brick within the last week, right before I got sick, unfortunately, which, I would have actually had this video out sooner, but right before I did this video, I played a game with the Wraith Brick list. It did really well. It's really tough. It didn't really lose a lot of models, which was great. I was able to revive a lot of the models from my Wraith units over the course of the game, just because my opponent failed to kill them the first time around. I will say this, though, the secondary objective scoring was a little bit bad. I think the secondary objective scoring in this particular list could be a lot better, but at the same time, I don't think it's quite as durable with the 5-man Wraith units. It really just depends on what your opponent can bring to the table, and if they're able to kill a squad of 5 Wraiths in a single turn. If they are able to do it, I think this list is a little bit more vulnerable in that way. But at the same time, if your opponent still can't quite do it, maybe they kill 4 Wraith Guard a turn, or maybe, 3 Wraith Blades, then I think you're sitting pretty well, because you can still revive 1 a turn, and you're still scoring on those primary objectives, and you still have those Wave Serpents that are able to kind of, muck up movement lanes and charge lanes and stuff like that. So, still a really powerful list. If you want to be faster as well, this list is a lot faster than the previous iteration with the Wraith Brick, so you do have to keep that in mind when, trying to formulate your army, what kind of direction you want to go with your Wraith Host. Think about how mobile you want your army to be. Okay, so in conclusion, Wraith Hosts can be really fun to play, and honestly, with all the points decreases over the last few balance data slates and patches, they can really allow you to field a much bigger army than before. I mean, just going back, if we look back at the previous page, all 3 Wraith units in those Wave Serpents and the Wave Serpents themselves, if we count all that up, we're saving like 60 points. That's an extra squad of Rangers, right? That's an extra squad of Corsair Void Reavers. Now, while this is a very tough and hard-hitting army, the Wraith Host does have weaknesses that you must address in your list, and with the effective use of Aeldari stratagems to be able to succeed with. So I do think you also have to be aware that when you're using a Wraith Host, you have to balance your stratagems in a way to prioritize movement, right? Wraith Hosts are extremely slow, which means I know it may be weird to spend, 2 CP on Fire and Fade on, a squad of Wraith Guard first turn. But you might have to do that so you can be in a better position for the rest of the game. I would have said in the past, just Phantasm the squad, but as we know, Phantasm is only D6, so you're not guaranteed to get to any objectives with that first turn. The best thing to do is to use Fire and Fade, just get the automatic 6 inches up there, and then, you probably don't have to really spend it too much more often in the game on that big Wraith Brick, because they're kind of where they want to be. Now, the Wraith Knight, on the other hand, is a great unit to use Fire and Fade on consistently throughout the game. So, being able to move out, shoot something, fire and fade back is a really good ability. And it's going to keep your opponent pretty stressed throughout the game. Having said that, and having, talked to you guys about Phantasm, Phantasm is still good, right? You can still use Phantasm on your Wraith Brick to be able to move back behind something. So if you need to, poke out with a few Wraith Guard to shoot something, but still want to be on an objective by the time the next turn comes around, then you can do that, right? To be able to control that objective, you can still use Phantasm to move back, cover the objective again, and also be able to be in range of something. So, a lot of times what my opponents will do is they'll think they're being cheeky and they'll put their unit like 20 inches out, 20 inches away from my Wraith Brick unit and then shoot it. And of course, with their big tank or whatever they get into range with, just around the corner and make sure they're not within 18 inches. And, I still move up, even though I'm not on the objective anywhere with most of my models. I can always Phantasm in their movement phase and get back onto the objective to control it. So there's some things you do have to consider when using the Aeldari stratagems. And, also things like matchless agility, right? Being able to advance auto 6 inches without having to use a fate dice can be really useful also. Okay, so thought I'd make this video because, Wraith's got a huge buff, and I love Wraith Guard and Wraith Lord and stuff like that. I just painted up a couple of Wraith Lords myself over the last month or two, and I'm actually excited as well for the new codex and to see what Wraiths actually get. We're going to probably get a detachment for Wraiths. I can't see GW not doing it. I'm really excited to see what it is. I hope it's good. I hope it's not as bad as Iandin was in 9th edition. You guys, God, some of you guys remember the Iandin detachment of 9th edition and how horrible it was. And you basically had to do a custom craft roll if you wanted to, make a really effective Wraith list. So I hope that's not the case. I hope GW actually gives us something good for that. But it's going to be super fun regardless to play a, Wraith Host army in our new codex. And even now, if you guys want to start, kind of playing and learning how to play a Wraith list, nothing is going to change from that perspective. So for those of you excited about Wraith armies and are like, oh, I'm going to wait to start, buying Wraith units after the codex comes out, honestly, you really don't have to. It's not like some units where you're going to want to wait, you're going to want to wait on the aspect wars like fire dragons. You're going to want to wait to buy those. You're going to want to wait to buy, I don't know, warp spiders and swooping hawks, all the old sculpts and stuff like that. The Wraith units should be things you're probably already buying and learning how to play, because there's not going to be much of a change in play style, in my opinion, from now until then. So anyway, just thought I'd say that to you guys. Go wild with it. Buy some Wraith Lords. It might be your last chance to buy Wraith Lords that are going to be, fairly cheap within the combat patrols and stuff like that. So, all right, guys. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. Sorry if I had a kind of a different voice this video. I've been sick for the last, 5 or 6 days, just really coughing and sore throat and all sorts of congestion and stuff like that. Nurgle's got me. I'm praying to Isha every day, but she, she wasn't answering my prayers for a while, and finally she did. So, more videos to come. I'll see you guys next time. If you do want to support the channel and join the channel's Patreon, I have free trials on that activated, and that will give you permanent access to our Discord community, which of course is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategy, tactics, and of course hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. You can also talk to me, obviously, and ask me, advice on lists and strategies and stuff like that. And if you even want to, get together and maybe do a tabletop simulator, kind of meet up where we, talk about positioning and stuff like that of Eldar units, I'm definitely down for that as well when my schedule permits. And if you guys want to also pick up some Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page, I'll leave the link in the description for that, as well as my Amazon affiliate links for any buying needs you guys might have. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.